computer.
Okay.
Yep, and get that going. Okay,
Right,
all right,
good.
excellent, good to go, wonderful, lovely. There we
Okay.
go. Everyone can see us. We're away.
Right, you can drive?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Excellent.
Right, thank you.
Okay, for those that are new who haven't been with us for a while, they're just the house rules. We know if you're eating lunch or if you've got bad internet bandwidth, feel free to keep your camera off, but otherwise, as much as you can, keep it on. Chatham House rules, just contribute, be respectful, be open-minded, have real discussions, and this is a tissue box free zone, so don't take yourself too seriously. In other words,
zone.
So there's the rules, and that's all there is to it.
And I think this one will be worthy of a lot of discussion today, because there's just so much going on in this space. We've actually just finished a session with one of our clients discussing this exact same thing. So the economic environment that the world is facing and all the risks out there, and then what's happening in Australia. So we're going to be covering that off. And at the end, we'll finish with some practical steps that you and your organisation can take in order to respond to this. So
but really, I'd say the big point is we want to know what's going on in everyone's world, because
we want to know what's happening for you.
Because I think, look, it's crazy, and I know Brendan, probably you were one. Brendan and Chris and Kath, I think you've been with us since the very wee beginning in, it's like February or March 2020. So here we go, it's 2023. It's like crazy.
No, I can't believe we're doing this.
Yeah. So anyway, but that being said, we really want to know what's going on in everyone's world. And also, as we will talk about in the coming months, and we're in the process of moving platforms for the community of risk management. So you'll see some email traffic on that. We really want to start to move it to a forum that's driven by the group's desires. So the more we know what the problems are that you're facing, the more we can set the agenda based on those problems, rather than us just, navel gazing and going, we're really interested in this month, and doing it that way.
So we try and find interesting things in the risk management space that we think are relevant, pertinent, or emerging, but also very, very keen to hear what you guys would like to talk about. And we know in the past, some of you have wanted to know more about things like risk registers and risk appetite statements and stuff like that. So we're happy to deliver technical content if you want that, and we're happy to deliver also sort of our insights and talk to you about emerging events. So feel free to reach out anytime on email and let us know what you want to hear about. Risk governance and safety and all associated things.
And sorry, and we never do plugs, but I'm going to do a 1 second plug for both of us, just because we're doing a fair bit more media these days. So I don't know if anyone caught the review of late night service outlets that's about to go down in the Northern Territory, and that's in the wake of the stabbing of a Darwin bottle shop worker. And obviously that sits in partnership with some bail review laws. And for any of us that do or have worked in the Territory, you'll understand it's a bit of a crazy kind of a cowboy nation. That's right. So no surprises there, but we've got some media out on that at the moment. And then separate to that, Bronwyn's also got some media out as well on the Respect at Work evolution and how it relates to the wonderful legacy, isn't it? Legacy services. So we'll put that on LinkedIn if there's any more detail on that we need to share. But certainly for those of us in the WHS space, and or if you deal with occupational violence directed towards your staff, it's worth keeping an eye on what's going on in the Territory in that regard, because it's pretty severe.
And pick up the phone if you want to have a chat about any of it as well.
For sure. Okay.
You could also keep an eye a bit more locally with occupational violence. There's that video of the teacher that's hit the kid in Maitland. I don't know if anyone's been watching that.
Yes, I saw that.
Opportunity to watch that.
Yeah. So that was just really unpleasant for everyone, that situation.
I don't think there's any winners out of it, but creates some sort of interesting discussions in our space. That's for certain.
For sure.
Did the teacher hit the kid or the kid hit the teacher?
Sorry, say that again, Andrew.
Did the teacher hit the kid or the kid hit the teacher?
Both, I think.
There was a scuffle, might be the best way to describe it, to commence the violence, and then the teacher threw him on the ground and whacked him a few times by the looks of it. So And then there was a moment immediately after where you can see the teacher just realised the actions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a pretty. The video did the rounds, but there's probably 8 weeks of sort of lead up to that from that classroom that has been missed in that video. So
Yeah.
And I'm sure the Department of Education have a lot to answer for in terms of their proactive steps that they should be taking to manage both the physical safety and psychological safety of teachers in that regard. So, watch this space, I reckon.
I think it's an interesting case with respect to the psychosocial guidelines that have come out this year, or that have been sort of pushed heavily this year. They came out last year.
Yes.
Anyway.
Awesome.
I just think it's not the last we'll hear of that with respect to an outcome. So
no, definitely not. And then I was going to say, finally, it's almost like we should do maybe we should do that in the news this week related to risk management. The other one was talking about reputation risk, the Four Corners about PRD Newcastle and some other real estate companies in Newcastle, and like clipping the ticket both sides and just widespread nepotism and fraudulent activity. So it's talk about ethics, conflicts of interest, all that juicy stuff. So check that out as well. So that's worth a watch. So okay, let's crack on, because we want to keep this short, because we really just want to have the conversation about people's viewpoints. So the current Australian environment, Ron.
Yeah. Okay. Can you flick over to the next slide, because that is. So the World Economic Forum puts out every year their Global Risks Report, and it's not like they're a bunch of lightweights. I mean, really, 390 businesses and institutions across 60 countries. In their words, in the report for 2023, it explores some of the most severe risks we may face over the next decade. So that's really, really interesting. And it's not really, as we mentioned in our LinkedIn video, doesn't really paint a positive picture for the world and, and our environment. Now, in January, when they released their Global Risks Report, interestingly, they also released their Global Cyber Security Outlook. Now, both of these reports are available on the World Economic Forum webpage, so go and have a look at them.
I was going to say, we'll just drop the links in that email with the recording and the deck as well, so you can go straight to it, because they're too big to attach. They're like 20 meg attachments.
But it's worthwhile having a look at both, particularly given the ongoing issues with cybersecurity, as probably the last sort of week would be Latitude Finance, and then in the last 24 hours, Meriton. So definitely worthwhile having a look at their cybersecurity outlook paper. But today we'll be discussing the Global Risk Report. So Global Risk Report, like I said, the WEF 390 businesses over 60 countries. But let's just have a quick look about what's happening in Australia at the moment, because we know that costs are going up across the board and the financial environment's tightening. So that much we know. Money's harder to get, loans are more expensive, and generally businesses are examining their expenses with a lot more scrutiny. So there's that. Our labour market remains tight, and getting people, let alone getting people with the skills we need, is really tricky right now. Related to higher costs is also our supply chain, which does remain a little bit wobbly, although it has improved from last year. But, it's getting more wobbly the further afield you need to go to source your goods. So the further away you are, the wobblier your chain gets around getting, it could be metals, it could be minerals, it could be other manufactured goods, but that remains an issue. The regulatory environment is also tightening now, with new laws implemented relating to IR and WHS, as we just mentioned. And there's also the need for some industries to respond to the outcome of various royal commissions. So there was the Financial Services Superannuation Royal Commission, the Aged Care Royal Commission, and the Disability Royal Commission is about to produce its report as well. So if you're in those industries, you've got something that you need to respond to. The COVID pandemic is now in its 3rd year, and it does continue to impact our businesses in a number of ways, including ongoing challenges with staff working from home or in a hybrid model.
Yeah, and I would say also too, and even you'd include the psychological impacts of isolation in that period are really starting to show through. No doubt Chris has probably across that. And Kath, I could see you nodding, you're probably seeing it in your workforce, as well as definitely a lot of us are probably seeing long COVID people in our network. I think we've got 2 or 3 in our colleague network that are still genuine battlers. And to be honest, I was super skeptical about it at the get-go, but it appears like it is definitely a thing that really ravages some people. So it's interesting to see that's with us, as is this very interesting hybrid work model. And we've been in Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne recently, and it's interesting to see the CBDs are absolutely bloody chockers, full again, but, and there's a big but, Mondays and Fridays are apparently dead zones. So the CBD is absolutely cooking again, but only Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Mondays and Fridays.
We call them the twats.
What's that?
It's interesting, James, because when I went to Brisbane a couple of weeks ago, the taxi driver said Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, but everybody's been told to work from home Wednesdays.
Really?
So
Okay.
yeah, so there's obviously different operating models with different companies of what they're choosing to do. But yeah,
I think
our Newcastle office is empty. Our Brisbane office was packed. Our Sydney office is empty, and our Melbourne office is empty.
Right, okay.
Really interesting dynamics.
Yeah.
But Brisbane was the one that was
Sydney
least hit
people
by
can't get
COVID,
to
which I
work
think is
anymore
why
because
it's
of
bounced back.
COVID.
Yeah, I think we reflect that too, Kath, that our Brisbane office has always been at full capacity. Sydney, we're still struggling to get everyone in. Melbourne is somewhere in between that. But I can report on Brisbane traffic that I think the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, certainly from where I transit in from, is probably the busiest days.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, so there you go. I guess, look, and then obviously natural disasters and business continuity impacts are still there and will still be there. And in amongst that, the ever-present evolution of climate change, and attached to that, the emergence and continued sort of, walking up the priority chain of ESG, obviously environment, social and governance frameworks for organisations. And even I think we're seeing with a lot of our clients in the disability and for purpose sector, the S starting to become really important for them. So it's about social impact, and we're seeing a huge emergence even in the profit for purpose model within the purpose-driven sector, as publishing social impact statements and things like that. And I can see you nodding, Carol, and you're probably seeing them
as well,
as I know you circulate in that world. So I guess, look, that's the short summary of the Aussie environment.
No, that's right. But all of these things are sort of presenting business risks for it, be it financial, customer service, people, compliance, and others. There is a lot to contend with right now. And as we were just discussing with our client we're working with this morning, this pace of change and volatility is probably not going to go away. So it's with us.
Yeah, and probably a really front of mind point with that on that client, because they're a counselling service. I don't know, for those of us that circulate around not-for-profits as well, they've noticed a really sharp reduction in the ability to get volunteers. And so the volunteer workforce has shrunk, they're estimating up to about 30%.
Just never came back after COVID.
And I don't know if that reflects any of the rest of our experience in that world, but it's interesting to see that it seems like it's harder to get volunteers. And what was the term they were saying? Volunteering on demand. So
yeah, spontaneous volunteering is what people are after, rather than a more regulated turn up at a set time with set hours. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and interesting to consider given the labour market or the volunteer market and how it's changed. So, just let me, we'll get that. I'll just get one more. We got Dave Johnny's. Okay, all right, go for it.
All right, so then if we turn to the world environment and some of the things that the WEF highlighted in their report, so they were talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine, presenting a crisis in terms of access to energy and food. The environment of inflation, increased cost of living, and unsustainable levels of debt, which is really interesting because I think in the Australian housing market, we're certainly seeing that, and we know people overextended themselves during COVID, and the financial institutions very willing prepared to extend that credit, but right now it's quite a risk averse environment. There's inflation, cost of living, everything's going up. So there is this unsustainable levels of debt in some parts of the economy, and that is going to impact all of us. Low growth environments. So this is possibly presenting as businesses with high risk aversity. So, you know, that low growth environment is quite troubling when you think about it that way. Widespread social unrest, and we're actually seeing that play out, I think, right across the world. I mean, you look at any number of countries right now, there is increasing amounts, including our own country, of this social unrest, movements of, you know, protests, etc., etc. So a lot of that sort of playing out across the world.
I was going to say it's a bit like, I think the report calls it the erosion of the sensible centre or something like that. And I think that is, if any of us look around where things seem to be ideologically on the two arms of, you know, social or political spectrums, it seems like everything's being pushed further out wide, and thus, or I guess as a result, it seems like what they're pointing at is the fact that it's creating more division in society, because the more it's creating this us and them, the more it's likely to create conflict, which I think is certainly
You're either
something
with me or against me, and there's nothing in the middle.
That's
you know,
right.
We're very, very extreme. And, you know, there's politics and other issues, social issues that are presenting themselves as seeing people becoming very polarized in this space. So yeah, the erosion of that sensible centre, I guess, is probably, you know, one way of describing it. So that's playing out right across the world, and in a lot of countries, sort of things that were the norm are now being challenged. There's also geopolitical confrontation, and that what they call in the WEF report the spectre of nuclear warfare. And, you know, we know that what they're referring to there is what's happening with, you know, Russia, China, North Korea. There is just a lot of confrontation going on in that space. And of course, the ongoing constant concern related to cybersecurity threats, which is, you know, just feels like it is increasing, not decreasing. So, you know, that's a whole separate topic on its own. But when you put all of that together, there is a lot of, you know, unrest and, you know, emerging risk issues going on at the moment.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and you can point to locally that national body around cybersecurity that Albanese's established or looking to establish. And it's interesting to note that they seem to be pointing towards a posture in the future that's an offensive posture in terms of our national posture around cybersecurity, rather than being very passive and defensive. And I thought that was interesting in the change of the language. That certainly is reflective of what you see in this report, that it's state and private sponsored actors being involved in these cybercrime incidents. But it's interesting that the whole concept of just having a defensive framework seems like it's not enough now. No, it's not to suggest we're going to go out and start interfering with other countries' interests, but what it's saying is that we need to have almost like a forward offensive defense mechanism as well as just a protective, which we thought was interesting. And then moving on.
And I think just to, you know, pass a comment, and maybe someone who's probably better educated in the IT space than myself can, you know, pass comment here, but with the amount of cybersecurity issues that continue to present themselves, it is almost every day another organisation. Like overnight, Meriton have now fronted up and said, yeah, we've got this issue. It doesn't just relate to Meriton guests, it relates to Meriton staff. And by the way, staff, all your health data that we've gathered about you and your birth certificates, and it's all gone. And so, you know, it's troubling and puzzling that organisations are not being more front foot and proactive in this space. If you learn from the experience of what's happened to others, did Optus not scare you enough to, you know, be more proactive in this space?
No, but it wasn't. Okay, it wasn't.
It is really.
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting because there's this sort of need to compete, there's this need to innovate and need to take on sort of new technologies, and the bar is pretty high. So you end up opening up, increasing the complexity for organizations.
Yeah.
But as you increase the complexity, you reduce your observability and you reduce the ability to understand when those risks take place. So I think it's a really interesting tension between the ability to sort of invest and extract more value and create more value, but at the same time, creating new risk, and how organizations and how boards straddle that. And in particular, production workloads of artificial intelligence workloads, the things like ChatGPT, as people start to increase the use of those, the whole security sector doesn't even know what the risk space looks like there. It's both terrifying and hugely exciting to me as a bit of a nerd. So I think that whole space is going to be, I'm surprised it hasn't gone up even further in the risks in the 10-year scenario.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all agree on that. And yeah, Scott, you and I were even chatting about ChatGPT yesterday, and it's just mind blowing. If anyone hasn't already started to fiddle with it, like, do yourself a favor and go and have a play. It's like if you don't think Skynet's real, then just go and play with ChatGPT and you'll understand
And,
it.
and as Scott said, it is both terrifying and exciting. But I asked it some questions, and just watching the answers come up, I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. Oh my God, this is scary. Like, I went between the two emotions of what it really was. So, but you're right, it absolutely presents issues for all of us. Yeah. And there's definitely a tension around it, but the protection of people's data is something that I think, organisations definitely could be more proactive in that space. It amazes me that we continually see hacks happening every day now. It's so normalised now. Just kind of go, I hope it's not me, but no, whatevs. It's just becoming very normalised.
Yeah, desensitised. Yeah. So anyway, so look, and there's a great section in the report that I was surprised, given because I'm the ever-present cynic, as we both are, and I'm like, I always look at these reports and go, who stands to gain out of all this gloomy outlook? And then you look at the bottom and it says Marsh McLennan Insurers and Zurich or something like that, and you straight away go, insurance and banks, of course. Like, why would we not want to dial up the calamity and then go, here's an insurance product for it?
Maybe lawyers too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Not pointing fingers.
I'm actually disappointed in my profession that we went on the bottom of that as well.
So, Chris, we might need to work on that.
Right.
Next year's report presented by Hickson's plus XXXX others.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, can I say at Denton's globally, our fastest growing group is our cybersecurity investigations and recovery team. That we're doing that not only as lawyers but through our global advisory piece. So we're back ending it and front ending it. And the sky's the limit in terms of what that expansion looks like, because it's so mainstream, as you say.
It's a game on space, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just it.
Like, I presented to our grads 3 weeks ago, and I'm like, I don't know what you're all interested in, but if you probably should be interested in cybersecurity if you want to still be doing this in 50 years.
Well, I think it's just an interesting comment too, looking at the short-term and the long-term outlook in the report. There's only one technological risk highlighted in the report.
Yeah.
Yet we're talking about, and we're all agreeing here how impactful cybercrime is, but that's only one part of the disruption that AI units like ChatGPT and what's going to come after it are going to create. I mean, we are talking about potential risk to disruption from a technological perspective, similar to the Industrial Revolution and the introduction of the steam engine.
Yeah,
well, that's right.
Absolutely
that's right.
agree.
You're spot on, BG, because I know you and I've probably seen those types of presentations where they talk about those like S-curves and things like that, and they show steam engines and the internet, and then you look at it and you'd have to put your money on AI and just go, that's...
Yeah, look, I haven't had the opportunity yet to read the WEF's Cybersecurity Outlook report, but definitely on my weekend reading list, because I think, they'll be fascinating to see what they've got to say about just exactly that, Brendan.
For sure.
You have such rock and roll weekends, Bron. That's very exciting.
I
was going to make a comment, but you beat me to it, Chris.
Shut up.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm
it was too easy a bird. Sorry, Bron. Oh, look, you're speaking to nerds
all right.
all around.
We'll
it's
discuss that later.
I'm curious, the read between the geoeconomic confrontation being at 3, but don't worry, by 10 years' time from now, it'll be at 9.
I know, right?
There's a fairly optimistic kind of read there for me.
I know. No, you're right. I looked at the 2-year time span, and it's like, so 10 years, it's essentially all about climate change, followed by involuntary migration, which is also probably directly related to climate change. And then you go 2 years, it's all, what do you call it, cost of living, which, it does. I would say you're right, Scott, in the optimism, but over the short term, it actually seems quite short-termist in a simple-minded way to be just all about that in the next 2 years and totally unresponsive. Because
as long as it's not climate change post-nuclear winter or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we kind of giggle about that, but
Sorry, what was
Really?
that, Brendan?
As I say, we kind of giggle at that comment, but really when you look at it, I think Scott's right. I think this report's also failing to link the holistic view. Large-scale involuntary migration can be driven by any number of factors, and it's unlikely to be driven by just one. It's more likely, I would actually probably, in the current look at that, I'd actually suggest that large-scale involuntary migration should be higher up the 10-year list and actually be as a result of everything below it.
You're probably onto something.
Because we think, that's really happening right now when you think about what's happening with geopolitical problems and wars, as well as natural disasters. That's what's really driving a lot of that sort of, migration and movement of
conflict,
people.
Climate change, economic, political systems. I mean, we're in Saibai in the Torres Strait a couple of weeks ago, which is only 2.5 k's from New Guinea. And their seawall on a high tide, like an everyday high tide, is about to be overrun by the ocean. And it's like their their water treatment plant's about 600 mil away from that high tide line. So it's like it doesn't have to shift much, and that whole island's basically gone, and they'll have to involuntarily migrate somewhere else. The same as, what's the other one? Is it Kiribati and some of those other islands?
Yeah, Kiribati.
Yeah, Kiribati.
All those kind of places. Yeah, you look at it and you go, wow, this is... Yeah, and I think, you're right, Brendan, they can all, what do you call it? There's more than one cause of involuntary large-scale migration. But anyway, so look...
But it's interesting when you think about it in the context of either way, as an organisation, where do you get your resources, resources and or people, if you've got things outsourced into some of those countries, or where are you selling to? So, it's either you're buying from or selling to, but either way, that landscape's going to change potentially for you. So,
Yeah. And I think it was The Economist earlier on in this year was saying about the shift in supply chains from, efficiency to resilience. And I think this report sort of reflects that as well. That's not about efficiency anymore. It's about making sure that you've got an alternate contingency if your lithium or your other reliable in-source supply suddenly gets interrupted, whether it's a conflict, a natural disaster, or otherwise. So anyway, we'll move on because I want to cut it so we can chat more on this. Did you want to add something?
No, I just thought it was interesting. Last observation there, number 8 remains number 8 over 2 years and 10 years around cyber. So I thought that was interesting that hasn't moved around according to the WEF at all. So
I was going to say, I still think that needs to come up higher, but anyway, that's by the by.
And look, in the report then, probably the next thing that was interesting was just how they were linking them all together. And we always say one risk is linked to another, and erosion of social cohesion then becomes severe mental health deterioration, chronic health conditions, infectious diseases, like everything's sort of interlinked. And, when James and I were looking at this one, it was like follow the bouncing ball. You can see how one thing impacts another thing. So I thought it was an interesting diagram or a graphic to put up there, and, certainly worth, examining how things are all linked together.
Yeah, which probably then brings on to is this where we've got the polycrises? Yeah, so I think that's actually talking to what you were suggesting, Brendan and Scott and Carolyn as well, that, you've got what they're, like sarcastically again, I'm like, have you guys just coined another term so you can just profiteer off it? Probably, maybe, but whatever, we'll go with it. Polycrises being a little bit what probably the risk nerds in the room would call more the VUCA style indirect and direct interactions of multiple actors on a complex system. So cluster of related risks with compounding effects, predominantly around things like water, food, energy, and critical metals and minerals. Obviously, these things underpin critical functioning for societies and have got that destabilizing effect. And I think that probably, to us, that feels like that's got a bit of legs in terms of the potential for a conflict leading to a supply chain disruption, which also interacts with a climatic event, which therefore leads to, another banking sector crisis.
And you think about that kind of, standalone, they're one thing, but when you put them all together, the overall impact exceeds the sum of the individual parts. And I just thought it was an interesting way that they've expressed it in terms of polycrisis. So that's something that could enter the lexicon now, and, we'll all sound really clever when we know what it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And with that as well, on that space with new words as well, if you haven't already, read the section on right to data privacy and anonymity, because I think it's actually I thought it was the most fascinating
Data
section.
rights as human rights.
Yeah, that's right. And I thought it's interesting because it's like, you think about all this like bloody nonsense in Newcastle about smart cities or whatever. The cynical libertarianist in me goes, why the hell would I want the council tracking my movements all over Newcastle? It's just more data on me I don't want them to have. And there's a whole chapter in there about what constitutes rights around data. And it's interesting that it even goes to the point of making some kind of interesting assertions around how nation states could use and or misuse data like that. So I think it's always good to be well read, and what is it? Forearmed is forewarned, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not that we buy into conspiracy theories, but we're both ever-present cynics, and I think most of us in the room would probably fall into that category to some degree as well. And so I think it's just interesting to
anyone who works in our space is probably somewhat cynical.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If you're not, you just haven't had enough punches
but
in
I've
the
got
face.
I've got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, here you go. That's right. Okay. All right. So what can we do? And for those that aren't Simpsons nerds, like both of us are, the old, what is it? It comes from that episode about, the Chinese word for crisis is the same word as opportunity. And then Homer goes, crisis-tunity. So, so what can we do about it? And then I always come back to this going, complex challenges can't be solved by short-term decision-making. I feel like those words particularly resonate for me around the last couple of years in the Indigenous affairs sectors, that so many people have tried super complex, nuanced problems. You can't do any positive through short-term decision-making. So what can we do? And this is our synthesis of the report. So you can call total bullshit on it, as I would hope you would do at times if you want to. So first one we thought, because we've looked at a lot of the work we've been doing the last 12 months in a lot of different sectors and going, all right, well, what is it that's the thread together that we think could work that? So I would say I'd point to ASX banking institutions, one in Brisbane that Carolyn probably knows, that's a mutual that's also going through a merge with another mutual, not naming names. They are surprisingly good at this. Supply chain criticality analysis. So looking at almost like Brendan Gazzard, almost like critical controls style analysis of your supply chain to work out if this, if this domino falls, everything else scatters. And so they've really gotten quite good at understanding supply chain criticality, and they are definitely on the thinking resilience, not just efficiency program. That will be.
And I always say, think about not just who you're buying from, but who you're selling to. Like, you think about all aspects of your supply chain and what's important.
Yeah, and so look, we're always going to advocate using some sort of risk-based method or methodology. So we're saying use your risk assessment or your risk analysis methods at your disposal to complete some sort of supply chain criticality analysis, because they can turn up some interesting things, whether it's, the supplier of your boots, of your gloves, of your this, of your widgets. It's interesting. We think also devote real energy to understanding the emerging risks and issues your sector is facing. So again, looking at what our client base, trying to cherry pick what our client base does really well, the good ones. Competitor analysis is what stands out there to me. So the good ones, they understand their competitors and they're great at trying to anticipate the moves they might make. So when we're saying real energy to understanding emerging risks and issues, what we're really saying is looking at your competitors, looking at what the problems are that they're having, asking yourself the question, is that something that we are going to encounter, or we can we can profiteer off their mistakes? They fell down that hole, we're going to walk around the hole.
Yeah.
So that would be a second thing. Third thing is, look, this was because we wanted to keep it practical. If for those of us in the room that are, risk managers, WHS managers, senior leaders that might have responsibility for risk, we think it is actually worth considering prepping some sort of a briefing paper for your management team or for your board, if you report to a board, on these types of emerging issues, in terms of at least calling attention to what's going on in the world and what you believe as a risk professional are the critical issues relevant to your organisation's future success. Because obviously if you pick, aim for 6, and if you pick 3 and you're right, then at least you've demonstrated the value of your role there. It's like, woohoo, win.
You have to stay another day.
That's right. That's right. So look, that's a real thing that we thought is, look, even if it's really just, if you're a senior leader yourself, chair a session for yourself with your fellow senior leaders and say, look, boys and girls, we need to sit down and chat about this and work out what it is that's going to hit us from what angle. So, and
in your supply chain too, also just have a think about people. I mean, the issue at the moment around the labour market is another sort of issue that, you know, organisations are dealing with, be it contractors, employees, volunteers or whatever. So take a really good examination of your labour market as well.
Yeah. Fourthly, so just, you know, as I know most of us already do, just read widely and regularly. One that we've fallen back on too lately. For those that haven't read Risk Savvy, I'm going to say some of us might not have. If you haven't, you need to read it before the end of the financial year, just because it will really alter your thinking.
You're putting a timeline on people. Ooh,
why not?
It's giving everyone homework now.
Yeah, do it. Yeah. So yeah, look, it's written by, I think he's a German psychologist or something like that, but it's fantastic in terms of changing the way you think about risk in your business and your personal life. And I think it's just a nice little cage rattler. But read widely and regularly. So I mean, these kind of reports, that's an obvious one. But then all the other bits and pieces out there, and it can be a bit exhausting and overwhelming. We just always come back to, all right, well, what are the critical things relevant to the sectors that we serve? So whether it relates to mining services, disability, out-of-home care, banking or whatever, or Indigenous affairs, we're just across those information sources. And then, as we always say, remain optimistic. Like, you read that report, you just feel like going and necking yourself. But as is always the case, there's always opportunities.
I got 8 pages into the report and had to have a break because I was so depressed.
Yeah. What is it? Is it Warren Buffett, be greedy when others are fearful, that sort of thing? Like, it's like, so like lean into it. Like, don't buy into all this negativity, because if you look in the media for more than 5 minutes, you'll be convinced the world's ending. And this report doesn't do anything to assuage that in the slightest. But there's always opportunities out there. And if you're smart about your risk management strategies as an organisation, this is probably actually a super quality time to pick up opportunities that others missed, whether it's property acquisitions or acquisitions of organisations, whatever. I think there's immense opportunities in the current market. And as Scott was saying, and ChatGPT, bloody use it. It's going to take over the world, but we're using it with social media planning now. And the thing's unbelievable in terms of time saving and effectiveness. So use what's out there. So anyway, that's our 5-point suggestion list, and everyone can tell us to get stuffed, but that's what we took out of it.
But that was our reading of the WEF Global Risks Report for 2023.
Yeah, so let's just go and have some discussion, and we'll flick everyone that slide deck. But yeah, really was more keen to hear from the group in terms of, so what out of that lot, if any, are affecting you at the moment? You know, what are your pain points? What's really hurting you, and give us a good news story. What are you doing about something in that space that's actually yielding a good result? And if no one volunteers, then I'm going to voluntold Andrew, as always. Okay, no worries. See you, Jason. Thanks, buddy. Who's going to go? Come on. Don't make me like pick people. I hate doing that. All right.
Has anyone got any sort of?
I'll go.
Okay, go.
Sorry, I've literally just been out and come back in.
Oh, okay. You're right. Are you there, Kath? No, I think we'll just jump off and jump on again, and then we'll jump back to you. I was going to say, Kerry, is there something you wanted to throw into the mix? Because it's great to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not working with any particular organisation at the moment. So, but those top 10 were interesting. They certainly very consistent with the IPCC report that's come down. Yeah. And I think we need to pay very clear attention to that. Yeah. I think, it's pretty clear it's going to have, inaction on climate. That's 6 out of 10 were the environmental factors. Yeah. So, you got to be listening to that, and all current thinking is that things are actually moving much faster than the modelling suggests.
Yeah.
And that the tipping points are unpredictable.
Yeah.
So particularly with El Nino coming now.
Yeah.
So I think we, all else really, whilst I understand the cybersecurity, but that it's going to impact on everything. And I read an article from the Financial Times the other day about the impact on the banking system and the failures of these banks recently, which presumably has happened after this report's gone out. Or
wobbling around of the regional banks.
Yeah, that's right. So and the suggestion being that two types of banks, one's retail, one's investment, people being unable to fulfill their debts because of interest rate rises is going to be absolutely critical, and that's a large proportion of that is due to food shortage and water shortage and resources shortage. And then you've got investment banks that have been not investing in all the stuff they should have been investing in to prevent climate change for 30 years, are going to be left with things that actually don't have whole value. And so that is a really high risk. So that doesn't, the banking system didn't sort of feature there. I don't know if it is included in one of those ones. I'm not as familiar with the terminology.
They probably paid to have their data deleted from
quite possibly.
Marsh holds their accounts, I suspect.
Yeah, that's right. Marsh.
But I did think it was interesting overnight. Matt Common from the CBA, Peter King from Westpac have had to come out and give assurances with regard to, the stability of the regional banks within Australia. So I thought that was interesting that they've had to come out and do that, to give those assurances, because we've got, well, to be honest, Credit Suisse in Switzerland. Whoever thought Credit Suisse? I mean, really, are you kidding me? Some Silicon Valley bank that no one's ever heard of. Yeah, knock yourself out. But Credit Suisse, no way. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, thanks, Kerry. And I was going to say, Kathy, you right to share now because it was glitching a bit before on audio.
Sorry, I was transferring back to Wi-Fi. Labour market shortages are huge. Especially what I'd say professional people with degrees and things like that. We can't get people, and I think it's really incumbent on our organisations to start graduate development programs and really investing in people, because trying to get people from an outside workforce is really, really hard. So I think the more we can start to build capability in-house and get people, because often we look for people with experience and we can't find people with experience. So then how do we get people in at the graduate level, train them to give them that experience so they can actually then utilise the skills that they've got, because we're really struggling.
And it's such an interesting point, because a lot of organisations in the past have done the tagline of we invest in our people, but then go ahead and recruit externally. Well, now they're going to have to, walk the talk, because they just cannot get the externals.
Yeah, the problem's even more compounded than that, Bron. I appreciate where Cass coming from. We're seeing the same from a professional, but we're also seeing it from the blue collar trades as well. Really? We can't get blue collar trades to sign on. There's too much competition in the market. So what we've also identified as a potential risk that we're going to have to look at going forward is, how do we manage the inexperienced worker? How do we, for a long time, all our risk assessments, I'm sure everybody in the call has been the same. There's always been this line in there. One of the controls is experienced people. Our people know what they're doing. They know how to do the job. Trained and competent workers. We don't have them. And I think we're going to see an increasing number of unskilled or low skilled workers in our workforces. And we need to give that some consideration and how we're going to manage that from a supervision perspective, because, it's a catch-22. We don't have the supervisory staff to supervise the unskilled labour. We don't have enough skilled labour to be able to develop the supervisors.
Yeah. Well, I bumped into one of your colleagues at an airport exchange in Brisbane not that long ago, Brendan, and he was lamenting, this was one of the King's guys, lamenting the electrical trades deficit right across the industry, like literally cannot get them at all. Like, it's just insane. Like, so my question is, where have they gone? They used to be there.
They're all van lifing their way around.
That was my thing, is where have all these people gone? Well, how have we suddenly ended up in this hole? Is it because we've had an aging workforce and a lot of people have retired? Because we have seen a lot of retired people with a really good skill set go, and they've gone into retirement. I'm wondering whether the cost of living going up, people will come back out of retirement. But we've got a dwindling population that's caused this, because we're still, you know, overseas recruitment's still on the cards, but it's hard to get people in. So it's, I mean, you look at WA, they're doing effectively the £10 POM thing and trying to model themselves in the UK and all the pubs and careers officers to try and get people to go and live in WA. It's an interesting concept, but where did all the people go is my question.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I can see your hands up, Scott. We'll come to you in one tick. I was going to say, we noticed that even recently with the, what do you call it, Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations, trying to get doctors out into Western New South Wales to go and work in Indigenous communities. And like they were employing a full media team to go and do like tourism style shoots to then market exactly to what Kath was saying to like European, English speaking doctors, to try and get them over here, to get them out to these places, you know, and they're not sexy locations. It's not like Mudgee or somewhere beautiful like that. We're talking like further west in sort of, you know, tumbleweed towns,
which we shan't name because we don't want to sound offensive.
well west of anywhere you'd actually want to go, kind of thing. It's like, so how are you going to get doctors from overseas to a place that not a lot of people want to go to? Yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, so Scott, to you.
I guess I'm just keen to yes and a few of these things. I mean, Heidi's just comment then around trying getting staff for aged care. My more recent experience in Life Without Barriers, but I went to a conference last week where Ability Roundtable presented. They do a bunch of benchmarking across those industries, and they were saying that there's essentially a 40% increase in year one employee lapse. So it was around, I've got my numbers were like 13.9 in 2019, and then their modelling finished in 2021, but essentially 22.5% of the people who started in that sector left in the first year. And you know, it's a massive 22.5% of people who started in a job in the sector left in the first year.
Did you say disability or aged care or both?
Well, it's slightly lower in aged care, but only by 1% or so. So that was the disability number. So it's, I think, and you know, they're not, no robots are going to replace those jobs anytime soon. These are very, very human things, and what the NDIS is probably going to cost us about 60 billion this year against aged care of 18 billion or defence of 38 or something like that, or 48. So it's a big line item for the feds, but there's nowhere to spend the money. You know, it's just, there is a massive shortfall in terms of human capital there, and unless, from my perspective, I think WA is onto it, or anyone who's looking at skilled immigration and the rights of immigration policy has to help. I mean, maybe this sort of large scale involuntary migration thing is a 10-year plan, but we've got to do something in the short term.
I know. I'm glad you said that. I thought that as well, because like up in the Torres Strait, there's you would not think necessarily at face value, but there's a wealth of really experienced people up there, and a lot of them have got backgrounds in the Defence Force, and so like I reckon bring any of them from that island that's going to go under, bring the whole island down to the mainland and give them all jobs, because half of them have got trades and the other half have got
some of them have got like 2 trades, a degree, and like they were so diligent and enthusiastic. It's like, oh, can we just pick you up and like bring you back with us?
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, I feel like you might not actually be that far off with the involuntary migration, but as you said, it's not gonna necessarily solve the issue in the immediate.
Well, employment's still pretty low.
Yeah.
Unemployment's still pretty low, but things are more expensive, and then yet more people are leaving work. I can't resolve that story in my head.
Yeah.
People are leaving, but they can't pay their mortgage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And then you hear stories like we're saying with the session earlier today, one of our little pediatric not-for-profit clients in the Hunter, a lot of the families they support, a lot of them are actually nervous about sending their kids to school and daycare at the moment because they're embarrassed about the fact that they don't have enough to pack their lunch. And then they don't want to reveal the fact that they're struggling to pack their lunch, so therefore the child doesn't end up going and getting education. And it's like, it just cracks your heart in pieces hearing that, and you go, oh. So I was going to say, Heidi, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Because it's a really good discussion that we've got going there, and I just wondered if you've got any more perspective.
No, I guess it's from the aged care perspective. If you look at what the government is trying to in place on aged care as well, with the 24/7 nursing, but then we're not allowed to get nurses from overseas. They're asking for care minute notes. So we have to do X amount of hours on every single aged care staff, like every resident. But how can you do it with no staffing, and we can't get it? So then they try and do this Palm Pacific thing where we can try and get staff from East Timor. So we're bringing in some staff from East Timor, but we've got to provide them housing. So then where's the risk then of if they have a workers' comp claim and they go back to East Timor, how's our premiums going to cope with that? So there's a whole world of pain that they're just not looking at. And then you've got the regulators coming in. So COVID is almost to the end, but then you've got WorkSafe making a targeted approach against, or Safe Work targeted approach against aged care, looking at fit testing versus fit testing of masks. So fit checking versus fit testing. They're now saying that all aged cares have to do fit testing. Even though the commissions basically are saying, the aged care commission is saying fit checking each time is more worthwhile than doing a one-off fit testing of an N95 mask. So then they're coming in saying, well, you've got to do this. So it's putting a lot of impost on.
Oh, did we just lose internet? Fuck, did we just hang because of that stupid?
I'm going to go with yes.
Okay, hang on. I might have to go over to Wi-Fi.
Person to come in and do cleaning.
Yeah.
Oh, go. Hang on. Go.
What is it? There you go. You're on.
Yep. Let me just see.
It says you're on.
Yeah. We back?
Just a thought. Just a thought on your fit testing point there, Heidi. That's something the coal industry has had in place for about the last 6 or 7 years as a requirement for pre-employments for anybody coming into our industry. And there are a lot of doctors out there, particularly in the Hunter Valley, who are providing extended pre-placement services for the coal industry that would have that equipment on hand to be able to do that. So that might be an avenue for you to reach in or look into to try and get that box at least ticked for your recruitment program.
No, thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, it feels hard. I've got to say, it feels so harsh for the aged care sector. Like when you go, like I just feel like it's the, and I'm not being at all rude here, Heidi, or mean to be, like it's most of the roles at that lower end aren't particularly sexy roles, or glamorous roles, not super well paid, but then what's expected of the staff is so disproportionately high, and then you've got this compliance burden that's easily easily at least akin to the disability sector, probably arguably much higher again, and a quite antagonistic at times regulator. And it's like, you just go, you just don't.
And we've got a lot of occupational violence and aggression. I know we discussed that before, but there's a lot of occupational violence and aggression. And these are from, not because they're being nasty, the residents, it's because they've got dementia. So they don't know any better, but then you've got resident rights. So the dementia resident is we can't do anything. We can't restrain, you can't medicate, you can't do anything. You can't send them off to a hospital to do anything. So then all you can look at is the care notes, ensure that they're safe, but then you just put another staff member. So get one bashed, replace it with another staff member. It just keeps, and then that staff member gets disillusioned. You're looking at the psychosocial risk.
So tell me why you can't get workers, Heidi?
Heidi, I'm curious to see what you think about the sort of the relationships between the Quality and Safeguarding Commission and the funder. It's like those departments, no one's ever met one another. Like
I agree totally. They're silos.
In terms of quality and care and compliance around that, and just how hard that is, and immature markets too. And yet you have this kind of increasingly complex standard to which you're being held to. It just feels like one of the, that's a glass half empty kind of comment, I guess.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I think
no, but it's so true, Scott. It's so true.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that, like it in a different context in terms of the Disability Royal Commission, and we've had some clients who've been the test cases there, and indeed have got a client who is currently in the Supreme Court in New South Wales, which is the first case of the Safeguard and Quality Commission in from an NDIS perspective. I think there is a lack of understanding of the complexity of those clients. So either in aged care with dementia or very high needs disability participants within NDIS, and understanding the load on support workers, especially in those really rural and remote areas where you've got, a disability service provider that might be, in a regional hub, but the worker is isolated. What do we call it? A tumbleweed town that we can't mention, James, further back, that providing that support becomes exponentially more difficult. And, we're dealing in the grey area of, people without capacity.
Well, you're exactly right. We're bringing people in from East Timor and putting them in Corowa and Leeton.
Yeah.
To try and support at homes there, so we don't shut those homes. How do you then train, or how do you orientate someone from East Timor to live in a country town? It's very difficult.
So look, we have 3 community health services at the moment as clients, who run in back of beyond sort of aged care, residential care. Some of them have childcare centres where they're in safe harbour at the moment because they have made a determination that with increasing regulation and lack of staff, that they're not sure that they can actually run those facilities. So that's become very disappointingly an increasing focus for our not-for-profit area. It sits very uncomfortably as a lawyer advising on that, because it's not nearly as black and white.
Yeah, and I think we even saw, I don't know if that reflects the experience of anyone as well. We've also heard some really interesting stories of the variability, let's call it, of auditors within that system for both the aged care and NDIS sector. More recently in NDIS, we're talking variability that looks like a cardiogram, almost a bit like, ask them one question this day, they'll give you this response. Ask them the same question 2 days later, they give you the opposite response. And I'm sure that doesn't assist.
It certainly adds to the stress of those organisations.
They've got the same personnel issues in terms of training them up, like bringing experienced auditors in, that they're all of the things we've talked about. I think they've got exactly the same issues. That it might be their first audit, and then they go back and they're told it's wrong, and then the next day they've changed their view because there's been some informal training. So it's
But I do wonder sometimes, I think Kath sort of mentioned this when she was chatting, and there was actually, I think it was reported in the Australian this morning about people coming out of retirement due to changing, economic conditions, markets, declining, impacting superannuation funds and investments, and et cetera. So, there is also some indication that we might see some former retirees come back out of their retirement and rejoin the workforce. So watch this space.
Excellent.
I was going to say, just please don't let it include my old man, because he's already surrendered his membership to the New South Wales Law Society, and I feel like there is nothing good that will come out of reinstating that.
I've got a whole lot of inappropriate things to say about that, but we'll just let that go.
We're not allowed to make disparaging comments about boomers, right?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, but look,
there's enough lawyers.
That's right. There's a reason why there's a whole what do you call it, genre of comedy called lawyer jokes. Yeah.
We need more young lawyers and less lawyers over the age of 60, I think, would be my general comment.
Couldn't agree more. But look, I was going to say we've shot the clock, and so we probably better leave it at that. But I also feel a little bit like, oh God, I feel like we've asked more questions than we've provided answers to. But I guess in a sense that's what these discussions are about.
The richness is in the discussion.
Yeah. And Heidi, I feel like I wish we could have, as a collective, just gone bang and solved that for you. But we'll hopefully it's inspired you to at least go forward in some capacity. But look, I would say, last comment, we'll publish it on LinkedIn. We're not going to run an April event because, for our sins, we're both going to be on surf trips in Indonesia. So I know, hard life. Just having to coordinate. She's in Lombok and I'm in Sumatra, but that's just how these things go.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, whatever.
But we'll be back in May.
And then also looking at options for another face-to-face session this year, and then also provide everyone in the distribution group details of where we're going in terms of the move to the more efficient platform. And I was even going to say, Carolyn, I know Chris has always put it out there, but do you reckon if there was ever an option, could we twist Denton's arm to use the boardroom to run a live session from Brisbane?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know we've done a couple.
Don't even need to twist the arm.
Okay,
Yeah.
legend.
And I feel like we'll twist it a little bit further, and we'll ask your cyber person to come along and have a quick chat with us.
Yeah, look, we've got a whole hub. I do offer our boardroom with the caveat that they are demolishing Eagle Street Pier on the other side. So I don't know if you noticed, but I'm just slightly vibrating, and will be for the next year. But it's certainly
no more George's Paragon.
No more George's Paragon. In fact, it's almost gone, which is a bit sad because my whole career has been predicated around drinks at Eagle Street Pier.
Nice. Okay.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you so
too.
much for coming along and for a great discussion.
All right. Catch you soon.
Thanks so much.
See you, folks.
Bye.
Bye.